Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our regularly scheduled Public Safety and Emergency Management Committee. Today is February 20th, 2019, and I am joined by Council Members Jeremiah Ellison, Councilmember Steve Fletcher, Councilmember Lene Palmisano, and my name is Alondra Cano, and I'm the chair of this committee, and therefore we have a quorum for this committee, and we can conduct the official business of the City Council on public safety and emergency management matters. So today we have an agenda that contains 7 items. And before we start, I do want to say thank you so much to all of the council members who were able to make it here today on Snowmageddon. I forget which version this is, if it's like 5 or 6, not sure. But we are very, very happy to be able to conduct our business so we don't have to push these items out. And we do have a very important report on the police body-worn camera program that we have. So with that, our first item, well, as you see, we have the agenda here before us. If there are any questions or changes to the agenda, if none, all those in favor of approving the agenda, please say aye. Aye. And our first item is to receive and file a public comment. So we typically have 30 minutes scheduled in our public safety meetings for anybody from the public that is interested in addressing the council on any matters relating to public safety and emergency management. I do not see any community members here today to speak to us, so we shall just go ahead and receive and file no public comments for that portion of the agenda. Our consent items include a contract authorizing a contract with SMG for bomb detection and 911 dispatch services at US Bank Stadium. Item number 3 includes authorizing a contract with SMG for the Minneapolis Police Department SWAT officers to provide extra security and a tactical response during large-scale events at US Bank Stadium. Item number 4 is authorizing a contract with the University of Minnesota for the Minneapolis Police Department bomb detection at TCF Stadium for football, soccer, and homecoming events during the 2019 year. Item number 5 is a passage of a resolution accepting a gift from the National Network for Safe Communities at the John Jay College for travel-related costs. And item number 6 is authorizing a contract with the Twins Ballpark LLC for bomb detection at Target Field for up to 30 large-scale events. Any questions on consent items? Looks like we're golden. All right, all those in approval of the consent items, please say aye. Aye. And that moves us on to our one discussion item, which is the 2018 fourth quarter Minneapolis Police Department body-worn camera metrics report. And if we could have Mr. Granger join us and lead us in this conversation. Thank you so much for being here. Floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair Connell. Council members, good morning. Okay, what I'd like to cover this morning is our agenda here, the number of recorded videos, department and precinct metrics, CAD events and BWC activations, department and precinct metrics, and then I'll get into the audits we completed, and then talk a little bit about our mandatory mentoring program, and then our next steps for quarter 2. So first off, for quarter 4, in October, we recorded over 50,000 videos. In November, 45,000 videos. And in December, 47,000 videos. And here's the breakdown by precinct. Videos recorded for each month with an average per day. Okay. These next slides represent a comparison by percentage of the overall or specific CAD events that required activation of a body-worn camera and the individual officers who were equipped with a body-worn camera and responded to these incidents. The percentage does not include events where an officer canceled off the event before arriving, and the percentages are by month. Before we get into the specific results, I wanted to talk a little bit about an anomaly we saw in the data, a couple of them. So one, when we were looking at the data, we noticed that there were parking problem events that had a significant impact, 2 in particular. One was related to a parking enforcement detail that's conducted in the first precinct. And what we determined from our analysis was 54% of those parking problem incidents didn't have video. And what we also learned was that there was some confusion as to whether video was actually required for these events. At the time, after we had discovered that, we clarified that with the precinct, the video was required. Then, in looking at the data again, we noticed a similar effect was caused by snow emergencies. Again, there was more confusion as to whether or not body-worn camera was required for these events. We had 3 snow emergencies declared, one on January 28th, one on February 7th, and the other on February 12th, and more to come with this week's snow. About 75% of the parking problems in January and February of this year appear to be snow emergency related. Again, we sent an email to all the officers reminding them that policy currently requires a BWC activation for these results. We're in the process of working on a more practical way of recording these events in CAD and determining the best way to document these events in the future. Statistics on the following slides where there appeared to be an impact on performance percentages involving parking problems will be presented in a comparison format. Statistics excluding parking problems will be presented in red. And before we get into that, I just wanted to just give you some more statistics that we found. There was definite impact in October, January, and February. As you can see, quite a bit of impact in February. So overall CAD events that required camera activation and the officers with cameras that responded to those, as you can see in October, when we included parking problems, our percentage was at 88%. When we excluded 89%, a small change. In November, our percentage was 91% overall. December, 91% again overall. And then in January, where the snow emergencies occurred, if you include parking problems, we were at 88%. When you exclude them, 89%. And then in February, a significant increase. With parking problems, 85%, and without a 90% percentage. Overall, from quarter 3, our percentage was 84%, and overall from quarter 4, our percentage was 90%, and that includes parking problems. Here's a breakdown by precinct. Again, statistics in red represent percentages, excluding parking problems, and as you can see in October, Precinct 1 was definitely impacted by these events with an increase of 4%. And then as you can see also in January and partial month, February, up to as of February 13th, all precincts were impacted by the snow emergency parking problem events. When we looked at traffic law enforcement only and officers equipped with body-worn cameras, in October, we were at 92%, November, 94%, and December, 93%, and as of February 13th, we're at 90%. And here is the breakdown by precinct. One of the things that I would like to point out is as of February 13th in Precinct 3, their percentage was 77%, and I'm going to talk about this in a coming slide, this low percentage of folks that didn't have body-worn camera, it only included 12 incidents. That's it. And I'll explain why in a coming slide. Suspicious person calls, we were at 90% in October, 92% in November, and in December, 90%. And then as of February 13th, we were still at 90%. And then again, here's the breakdown by precinct. I'd like to also point out again, there's a precinct 2 as of February 13th was at 79%, but it only included 11 incidents. Unknown trouble calls, October 89%, November 91%, December 91%, and as of February 13th, 87%. And then here's the breakdown by precinct. Okay, percentage interpretation. This data should be viewed as a snapshot in time as it is updated daily. When viewing partial month data, the numbers of CAD events in BWC video may be lower, which means any missing video can have a greater impact on the percentage for the individual or precinct. The CAD information is added to the dashboards automatically. If there are delays in uploading, for example, it can have the effect of making percentages appear low until the videos are uploaded and matched with the CAD events. When corrections are made as a result of the audit process, for example, when videos are labeled with a proper case number, the CAD event to BWC video matching can be done, which can produce a more accurate percentage. Auditing is required to determine what the actual issues are when we find anomalies in the data. Our first, or some of the audits we did this, not so much this quarter, but after we had found these anomalies in the data, we dug a little deeper and determined that we needed to do some case number and category audits. What we found was officers were still labeling their videos with case number year 18 as opposed to 19, just from the switchover from 18 to 19. And when you take a video that you recorded in 2019, but you label it with a 2018 case number, it doesn't match properly, and it appears as if they don't have video when in fact they might. Videos weren't properly categorized as startups. When they are excluded from the missing case number count. We have received some supervisory feedback indicating that videos in some of the audits are present in evidence.com, but they lack the case number we need to match it to the corresponding CAD event. This gives the appearance of a lower percentage for the officer. We also found this to be the case with some officers in training, which we have addressed with the training unit. And as a result of this, 422 audits were packaged with events that appeared to need correction, with an average of 5 potential issues per audit from January and February 2019, and sent out to supervisors on February 13th to ensure corrections were made. As part of their return responses, we also asked them to let us know if there were any discrepancies in the audits. For example, if there was a case number for a video, the supervisor review may show, if there was no case number for a video, the supervisor review may show the incident actually didn't require one. We did activation audits again. These audits examined whether individual officers were activating their BWCs when required for calls they responded to. Data from all 3 months in Q4 were included in the audits compared to our first round of audits from Q3, which included data from 1 of 2 months, focusing on the month that indicated the greatest need for improvement. The first group of Q4 activation audits focused on the lowest performers, which totaled 66 officers. Focus for this group was to ensure immediate improvement. These audits were sent out to the precinct's commands for action on January 11th. The second group of Q4 activation audits focused on middle performers, which totaled 110 officers. The focus for this group was to ensure more consistency in their BWC usage. These audits were sent out to the precincts on February 1st. And again, with this round of audits, the auditors were directed to select only CAD events where the officer was assigned, when arrival time was present, and where there was no BWC video recording for the incident. The presumption was that most of these calls should have recordings. No additional analysis was conducted at this point by the auditors. This basic methodology was chosen because our goal was to reach as many officers as possible who appeared to need improvement. And then the supervisors, when they get these audits, were directed to review the calls identified in the audits and conduct any additional review or inquiry needed to verify whether or not BWC video was required for each incident, which could include 911 call information, evidence.com data, police reports. We asked them to indicate on the form whether they agreed or disagreed, that there should have been a recording. If they disagreed, they were required to document the basis of their decision. For this round of audits, we asked the supervisors to cite the specific section of policy that supported their disagreement. We did that because we were noticing in some of the returns that there were some instances where people weren't clear what the policy was, so this was a way to ensure that there was sort of a review of the policy, and that learning would then be passed on to the officer who's the subject of the audit. If the supervisor determined that an officer was not activating their BWC as required by policy, they were required to mentor the officer on what the policy requires and to convey to the officer the expectation that change in their BWC usage was needed immediately. And then another change we added to this round of audits, we also asked the supervisors to document any direction they gave to the officer for improvement who was found to be not in compliance. And we added this component too as another way of assuring that these conversations for correction were taking place. Okay, our next set of audits were, we did our random sample of 25 officers again for quarter 4. It was a random sample from all the precincts of 25 officers equipped with body-worn cameras who primarily responded to 911 calls from October 1st to December 31st. A random sample of 10 body-worn camera videos were selected for each officer for qualitative review. The metrics used were, was there a full 30-second pre-event recording? Did deactivation at the conclusion of the call appear to be appropriate? Was there a proper case number entered? And was there a category entered? And then here are the results. There were reductions in each category except for no 30-second pre-recording. Some of the patterns we observed when we did these audits were some pre-event recordings were less than 30 seconds, but they still began prior to arriving on the call. Some officers were activating their cameras after arriving on the call, and both of these points speak to that increase in the lack of a 30-second pre-recording. There were some unintentional partial or full camera obstructions from seat belts and jackets. And then deactivation occasionally occurred while the officer was still on scene and the call had not completed. Our case numbers for...
Sorry, we have a question.
Sure, go ahead.
If you don't mind. Councilmember Palmisano.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Commander Granger, I'm just curious. We have our own just general public understanding of when a call is over, but could you tell me when, per the body-worn camera policy, when officially would a call be completed where an officer is supposed to turn off their body camera? Is it a certain signal? Can you help us understand
Yes.
how long it's supposed to be on?
Typically, it's supposed to be on until the officer leaves or the subject of the call leaves the scene. That's what's typical.
Until they fully leave the scene.
Yeah, they leave or the officer leaves, and the call usually, what we generally see is it's an obvious ending to the call. Like for a traffic stop, for example, when the officer has completed their contact with the driver and they pull away, deactivation occurs. Or if the officer still remains at the scene, maybe to write a report, and the person that they stopped pulls away, they can deactivate.
Thank you.
Okay. Case numbers, and I apologize, a typo here. This is for quarter 4. Our percentage for BWC videos without correctly formatted case numbers was at 3.5% for quarter 3, and we were at the same percentage for quarter 4. Mandatory mentoring. Our mandatory mentoring program was implemented on February 1st. The criteria for the program, for entry into the program, was low performance from quarter 3, along with overall performance from the last 2 quarters, and the number of times the officer had been audited in 2018 were all used for criteria. In this process, the officers required to record all calls they were dispatched or assigned to during their shift on a written log. A shift supervisor meets with the officer to review the log from the previous shift to ensure BWC video was recorded as required by policy. They are also required to address any BWC policy issues they discover in the process. If the officer is found not in compliance, the supervisor must document the issue along with the direction they gave the officer to improve their performance. The supervisor then forwards the usage log and a memo summarizing the outcome of the meeting to the officer's lieutenant and the BWC audit group, who reviews them daily for accuracy. Any deficiencies in the documentation are communicated to the officer's lieutenant requesting correction. This intensive supervision of the officer continues for 15 consecutive workdays, and any officer selected for the program will be tracked by the BWC auditors for the following 2 quarters to ensure their performance improves and remains consistent. Next steps. We're going to be doing a lot of reviewing for the remainder of the quarter and probably then some, which will include the total of 176 activation audits we sent out. In addition to all the mandatory mentoring logs, there's 180 of those, and then 422 case number and category audits. We also plan to conduct quarter one activation audits. Our mandatory mentoring program will continue to be used for our lowest performers. We also added a category for accidental activation. These activations are caused by individual users and by Axon signal. Use of the category will make tracking activation performance more efficient. So just to remind you about Axon signal, that's the automatic activation caused by activating the emergency lights in the squad cars. So what has been happening is an officer might be leaving the precinct, for example, responding to an emergency call, activate the lights. Well, anybody within that range who has a camera powered on, their cameras are going to be activated. So we really needed a category like this to tell the difference between videos that actually need our attention and videos that are just plain accidents. Inspectors and patrol lieutenants will receive access to 2 additional dashboards that will allow them to examine overall performance trends and trends for specific call types in their precincts. For example, if compliance for traffic stops is down, they will be able to generate a list of officers who didn't activate their cameras and address them specifically. Patrol lieutenants will receive training in how to use the dashboards and the query functions in evidence.com to proactively monitor the performance of their officers and their commands.
Okay, well, if we have questions from our committee, this would be a time to do so. So, Councilmember Fletcher.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess I want to make sure I understand properly. So the first precinct parking work is the meters that are closed around bar close, right? Like that's the late night parking rule changes, and there's a specific patrol assigned to
My understanding,
enforcing those parking rules.
My understanding is, and I'm not an expert on the details that are done down there, but my understanding is parking for enforcement is completed for vehicles parked illegally down there, and it's done in an effort to reduce the number of folks who may be up to criminal activity in the area. That's the extent of my knowledge of that.
Okay. And what do you think was the source of the confusion about why they needed to use body camera? It just, from where I'm sitting, it feels like we obviously want body cameras activated when we're having interactions with residents of the city or visitors to the city, right? I mean, that seems like the goal. So why would people think that the parking unit or the people assigned to that parking duty were exempt from the body camera policy?
I would say this, I mean, and I have some feedback on this, but I mean, I can't speak to each and every incident, but from what I've heard so far, the confusion kind of started from whether or not you needed to actually film an unoccupied vehicle where you may be taking some enforcement action versus an occupied vehicle. So if a vehicle is occupied, if there's an owner present, et cetera, that would be a case where you'd want to have body-worn camera video. But I mean, so for example, if it's just a vehicle that you're citing for being in the road during snow emergency and there's no one around, the assumption was that, there's no reason to film that.
So is that what the missing videos were? Was mostly videos of unoccupied cars?
Yes, that's what it appears to be, yes.
Okay, great. That is less concerning than what I understood, so thank you. I appreciate that.
Councilmember Palmisano.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I also assume that we will have had many more parking experiences to practice here when we get the first quarter data, given the number of snow emergency operations we've had to have. I think everybody should have it probably set by the end of first quarter.
Yes, that is my hope.
Do you know, in your efforts in collaboration with Axon as a vendor or in your own efforts, do you know of any other city or police force doing this level of auditing and this kind of systematic behavioral change with body camera technology at this point?
Not specifically. I mean, I would imagine that some of the pioneers that pioneering departments that adopted body-worn cameras really early on have maybe traveled this road, but outside of that, I guess not specifically.
So do you ever collaborate with them or speak with them and work with them on?
I've collaborated to some degree with St. Paul and with the park police, but no, not other departments. I mean, we're really just trying to do our best at examining our data as it relates to our policy and really just trying to determine how we can best respond to our trends and get ahead of any issues that could become issues to increase our compliance.
Mm-hmm. I appreciate that. I just do want to offer that, as we get better and better at this, internal audit has certainly been asked. So I'm aware of their getting requests from departments across the country for how to accurately audit body camera systems and programs. And I just feel, I know of our work with the Park Police and with St. Paul. I'm just curious if this is something that would be, I think it's an important story to share because it shows how you've put momentum behind behavioral change of this tool. I wanted to ask about a budget item from late last year. It was the budget item that helped to auto-populate case numbers into reports. And could you comment on how that might be going? I know it would not probably have happened in this data. It would be in first quarter data, but I was surprised to see the very low numbers of misinputted case numbers in your presentation. So could you tell us a little bit about that, and has it been implemented yet?
It has not been implemented yet. It is currently in the budget process with Axon. The plan is still to incorporate the auto case number adding the official name of the CAD integration. Thank you. That's the official name of this program. So once that budget process is resolved, and I would imagine that will include your involvement as well at some point, and then we can implement that into this process.
Thanks.
Well, I do have a couple of questions. So it is related to something Councilmember Palmisano just mentioned. So I just want to clarify. So there was a slide in your presentation that talked about the difference between logging it in as 2018 versus 2019. And so currently that logging in process happens manually, like the officer has to write it down or type it in?
They type it in. They can type it in at a desktop computer or via their phone. Mm-hmm.
And what we just discussed here is that we have a clear plan to get that automated.
Correct.
Okay, beautiful. My other question, I have one question on the 66, the number 66, which were the number of officers that we were still trying to get into compliance, and then sort of a broader question about the culture of body cams in the world of policing. So I'm curious if the 66 number that we saw in here, are those spread out? Are those officers spread out throughout the precincts and throughout the city, or do they tend to be, more, I guess, concentrated in one or two precincts?
All precincts are represented in both the group of 66 and the group of 110. So our low performers and our middle performers, everybody's represented. Okay. It's spread out.
Yeah, so you're not seeing like any strong patterns in terms of where they're kind of coupling or bulking up?
Not at present, no.
Not at present, okay. And do we know if out of the 66 officers in that category, do we have folks who are consistently not participating? Not participating is not the right word, but who are having challenges complying, or are they different? Is it a different batch of people from like last year?
Well, generally speaking, it changes over time. We've had folks that we've audited initially when we started that are in the 95th and above percentile now. No longer an issue at all. We have the folks that are currently involved in our mandatory mentoring program are represented. Some of those folks are represented in the bottom of that 66.
So would your work or MPD's work be able to address folks who are consistently showing up in that category?
Well, yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure.
And we're looking for that too. I mean, we're looking for, part of the criteria that we use is not just your performance. So we might look at a person's performance for a month, 3 months, 6 months, but we're also going to look at how many times that we've audited the person as well, and how is that, are they improving? Are they not improving? That's definitely going to be part of our criteria going forward.
Okay. And my other question's maybe more of like, I don't know, I want to say soft question, but it's less technical and more about your how you're assessing the field of how policing has engaged with and integrated police body camera into their work. So I'm just going to start with a little story. And back in 2013, I used to work for a council member here, and some council members at the time were running for mayor, including Betsy Hodges and Gary Schiff, who was then the council member for the 9th. And I remember the conversations of police body cameras being a campaign issue for them. It was something that they were proposing, something they were thinking about. And so now, fast forward to 2019, where our city enterprise has integrated this tool into our policing strategies. And so I'm curious from your perspective as a professional in this field, if it feels like now body cameras are more of the norm, kind of like the expected norm, or if it's seen as something like cumbersome that we're still trying to figure out how it works, and like maybe it's a part of what we do, but maybe in the future it won't. I'm just trying to gather sort of what is the employee sort of interface with this particular tool, and trying to assess if we're moving towards a policing culture where police body cameras are seen as a helpful thing, that are part of like your bread and butter everyday work, just like you put on the badge, you like turn on the camera, because I feel like institutionally, in a very formal, official way, we have said, yes, we're doing this, but we know that running organizations with a large number of employees, there's also like an unofficial culture that happens, right, of like how things are done in a certain office or department. So I'm just trying to figure out if some of the ways that we can reach 100% consistent compliance over time has to deal with not just the official culture of the institution, but also sort of like the unofficial ways that people perceive body cameras and some of the challenges that come with that, just to understand the general opinion of folks, and like do folks see this as a positive thing, as a neutral thing, as a thing that's like cumbersome and clunky, and like why do we have to do this?
Yeah. So I guess I would compare what we're experiencing, something similar to our MVR policy when that came about. There's always, I think human nature is, when you're being recorded, when you're on TV, things like that, that makes some people uncomfortable and nervous. So there might be some element of that. And then I think there's definitely sentiment out there where people recognize that, the cameras really are, I think the cameras help. And I think officers see this as well. They help more than they could ever hurt. They provide context for interactions, which reduces, the kinds of claims that people can make. If someone makes a false claim, for example, and I saw this in my internal affairs capacity, if someone makes a false claim, you pull up the video and you can say, that's false. That never happened. So, there's definite benefits for that. There's also benefits as far as evidentiary kinds of situations for criminal courts or, parking violations, so to speak. So I think where we are at is a combination of some of those things. Is it still cumbersome to a certain degree? It might be. Yeah, I would speculate that that's still part of the case also. And we see this from time to time where, and I hear anecdotal stories about this too, where, an officer will be on their way to a call, and they'll be listening to all the pre-call information. They want to get suspect descriptions and all the details and things that they need to know before they arrive. And then as they're arriving, depending on what kind of call it is, they're taking in the environment, the people who are present, if people might be armed, things like that. So in the midst of all that, they're also attempting to remember to activate their tool. And we're seeing a lot, people are doing this successfully, but there are still instances where, there might be a delay in the activation because of these factors, or there may but we're also seeing, I think we're also seeing too, for some, it may not just be a muscle memory thing enough in everyday activities. And obviously my job is to make sure that, people know the policy and that we get them to a place where, they activate the camera from muscle memory. So if that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate your insights on that. And I also wanted to hear if, I appreciate the patterns that we're seeing, and we're seeing positive trend in the use of body cameras. And I think your work has been instrumental in bringing accountability and capacity and learning to do that for our officers. And so I'm generally very happy with what we're seeing. I don't want to let my guard down, and be ultra congratulatory when we know we still have to reach 100 and we still have a couple of years to kind of prove that we can get to 100, or that we can sustain the 100 over time. And so I appreciate the meticulous and disciplined nature of getting down through the details and figuring out what are the tweaks we need to make, how can we make this better. And I'm also curious if we have mechanisms of incentivizing or awarding compliance. I'm kind of pulling from the mom book here. It's like when I want my kids to do something and they do it for a long time, I'm like, well, here, you can have this Pokemon card, or you can have this piece of cake that you wanted. So do we have a system in MPD where folks who are doing a good job of fulfilling the body camera usage policy, there's some kind of recognition of that, or, just because we do want to get to 100, and I'm just trying to brainstorm about the carrot and the stick and how do we get there?
Well, as far as incentives go, that's something that is on our list to develop something like that. We haven't yet. But it is on our list. We've really just kind of really been busy with just trying to get, everybody moving in the same direction. I do want to comment on something you said, though. You mentioned a statistic of 100%. I do not think we're ever going to get to 100%. And part of that reason is, because of the way this machine works. The CAD data is not always accurate or complete. I think our intent is still to do some analysis or calculate our error rate to figure out where we are. But I just don't think it's possible to get to 100%. I think we're close to our finish line, but we're not there yet. We have more work to do, and we're going to keep doing that.
Thank you. I appreciate that nuanced response. All right. Do we have another comment, question? Councilmember Palmisano.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to point out to Commander Granger that our goal is 100% activation compliance. I just want to make that clear.
On an individual level, yes. Mm-hmm. And let me be clear about that. So when, if someone were to ask me, if an officer were to come up to me and say, well, where should my percentage be? I'd say every single call. What I'm talking more about is what the dashboard is able to create, as far as statistics are concerned. There's a lot of inaccurate, missing, incomplete data, which, we could figure out all the instances where there is no video, but that would be an incredible undertaking. So I don't want to be misunderstood in the sense that I would ever tell anybody, there's, just as long as you got them for most calls, you don't have to have video for the rest. That's not what I'm saying.
Thank you for that clarification. Okay. I also think it's important that we're managing a program and not statistics. I think that's where police departments in the past have gotten themselves into trouble. In terms of how far we've come, thank you for that context, Chair Cano. I want to point out that it was about 1.5 years ago. We should recall that MPD as a department and other leadership here in our city were patting themselves on the back about how many more videos they had and about how many more hours of footage they had. Shortly before, the day before, our internal audit team found that, in fact, body-worn cameras were only being activated when they should about, I think it was 66% of the time. Am I wrong on that, Commander Granger?
I don't remember that specific
55%
statistic.
says the capable woman in the back from the mayor's office. So a little over half the time is what I remember. Only a little over of half the time than they should have been using their camera by policy. And a year and a half later, with this kind of help, we've accomplished a lot. And I just think it's important to know that we've accomplished a lot in achieving this level of body-worn camera activation. And by that, it just doesn't mean hours of footage of officers driving around. It means activation when these cameras are supposed to be on. And I'm really excited to see leadership and you, Commander Granger, prioritize these really behavioral remaining obstacles. And I really like these new things that you've added, adding into this round of audits. I've long presumed that supervisor oversight of this was a sticking point, and you've added in asking these supervisors to cite the section of policy that supported any sort of disagreement with this body camera designation being right or wrong. You've added to this round of audits asking them to document any direction they gave the officer for improvement or not. I think these kinds of things are really going to help the mandatory mentoring piece. I'm really excited about. I do think that this might well decrease your percentages for next quarter when any officer selected for the program is going to be automatically audited for the next 2 quarters to ensure their performance improves. That's going to change your metrics a little bit, but you sure are attacking the problem the right way. So thank you.
Thank you.
Councilmember Ellison.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just had a question about, some of the follow-up that happens. I know some of the city's processes when, an officer has sort of stepped out the bounds of their task or their duty on camera. But I also know that we've had a couple of instances that I won't go into detail because we mostly talk about them in closed session, but there have been some incidences in which we're hearing about cases of officers having their camera on, but those accountability measures, when an officer sort of breaches their duty, goes sort of further than they're supposed to, where those accountability measures break down and there is no sort of accountability for the officer. And so could you walk us through on your end, when an officer, you mentioned earlier, when somebody makes a false report, you can look at the camera and see that's a false report. But when an officer, sort of unjustly strikes a citizen or, is, maybe verbally aggressive, what are the steps for the police force to start what are the gears that get kicked in to start holding officers accountable for those kinds of actions when they're caught on camera?
Well, I would first say that, we have a progressive discipline process, which I'm not involved in anymore. I was when I was in internal affairs as the commander there, but I'm not anymore. My role in body-worn camera auditing is to, sort of do the reviews for the qualitative and quantitative data. We've had a heavy focus on quantitative data, less of a focus on qualitative. And when I say qualitative, I mean actual video reviews. So sort of our SOP for doing video reviews is if we notice something in these videos that's inappropriate or a violation of policy, that's something that we can refer to internal affairs or OPCR. And once it's referred there, we no longer have any more involvement in it. Our job is basically to address the compliance issues and then refer issues out to, say, for example, OPCR or the training unit, for example. If we see sort of a trend of people, where we think there's more training might actually benefit a shift or a precinct or the entire department, we would make that referral as well.
Thank you. Yeah.
Beautiful. All right. Looks like we don't have any more questions for you today. Thank you very much. We look forward to seeing you at the next quarterly report. So without further questions or items on our agenda, it looks like our business is adjourned. And, oh, I'm sorry. Yes, thank you. So I shall make the motion to receive and file the 2018 fourth quarter Minneapolis Police Department body worn camera metrics report. All those in favor say aye. Aye. And with that, our business is adjourned. Let's go get our cars from the snow. Hello. Somebody just got their car.